There are places in history where something happened so completely, so finally, that the people who were there never talked about it again. Not because they forgot, because some things don't survive being said out loud. You know about 300 Spartans who walked into a mountain pass and didn't walk out. But here's what no one tells you, and this is the part that should have been the movie. 11 months later, the Spartans came back, not to die beautifully, to collect. And what they did when they arrived, what actually happened inside that camp when it was over, was something the ancient world went quietly around for centuries. This is that story, and it gets darker before it gets righteous. Somewhere in a mass of 300,000 men, the largest army the Western world had ever seen, one soldier picked up a rock from the dirt. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. He just threw it. And that single stone, that one unremarkable piece of earth, ended the Persian Empire's ability to ever threaten Greece again. We're going to talk about that stone. But first, you need to understand what it was thrown into. 3 days after Thermopylae went silent, Xerxes walked to the battlefield personally. Persian kings didn't do that. Walking among the dead was beneath the theatre of royal power, but Xerxes walked. He found Leonidas among them. And here's where history takes a turn that tells you everything about the psychology of a man who considered himself a god king, standing above ordinary consequence. He ordered the head removed from the body, mounted on a stake. Then he had the body crucified. Now, Persian kings didn't do this. This was the thing they never did. Cyrus the Great had honored fallen enemies with proper burial. Darius I, Xerxes' own father, had done the same. The entire Persian imperial tradition treated fallen commanders as warriors deserving of dignity. It was protocol. It was identity. Xerxes broke it, not strategically, personally, because those 300 men who were supposed to be dead in hours, had held his army for 3 full days. They had cost him somewhere between 10 and 20,000 soldiers. They had allowed Athens to evacuate every single civilian onto ships. They had bent the entire shape of his invasion, and they had made him afraid. What does it feel like to be a man who commands 300,000 soldiers and realize a dead king still frightens you? He thought the desecration was a message to every Greek city-state still watching. This is what resistance earns you. He was right that it was a message. He was catastrophically wrong about what it said. The Persian army moved south. Athens was already empty. Ghost streets, abandoned market stalls, dogs with no owners. Themistocles had ordered the evacuation on the advice of an oracle and the cold logic of a man who understood that cities can be rebuilt and dead civilians cannot fight. The Persians didn't just occupy Athens, they burned the temple systematically. This wasn't looting. This wasn't soldiers being soldiers. Persian commanders were under orders to destroy the sacred sites, the treasury, the archive buildings, the temples on the Acropolis, everything the Athenians considered the physical proof of their god's protection, reduced to black stone and ash. But here's what Xerxes fundamentally miscalculated about burning a city whose population is alive and watching from the water. You don't erase a people by burning their buildings. You concentrate them. You give them something so enormous and so permanent that surrender stops being a rational option. Because now there is no going back. There is only forward or nothing. The Athenians who watched their city burn from wooden ships became the people who won at Plataea. Xerxes had handed Themistocles the greatest motivational weapon in the ancient world and had not charged him a single drachma for it. What if I told you that Plataea, the battle that saved Western civilization, almost never happened because Sparta didn't want to fight? After Thermopylae, the Peloponnesian League had a plan. Build a wall. Fortify the Isthmus of Corinth. It was narrow. The Spartans were the finest land army alive. They could hold it indefinitely. And everything north of that wall? Athens, Thebes, Boeotia, Thessaly. Let Persia have it. Themistocles, when he heard this plan, said something that stopped every conversation in the room. He said, if you will not fight for mainland Greece, if you abandon Athens to ash and rubble, then Athens will sail its entire fleet west to Sicily. Every ship, every sailor, every oarsman. We will found a new city. We will leave you here. And without the Athenian navy, the largest fleet in the Greek world, the Persian navy could simply sail around the wall. They could land anywhere in the Peloponnese they chose. The wall becomes a monument to a strategic error. The alliance didn't collapse, But the fact that this ultimatum was necessary, the fact that the coalition that saved Greece was held together at one critical moment by a threat, tells you exactly what kind of alliance Pausanias was commanding when he marched north. Not a brotherhood, a mutual deterrent with bronze armor. The number most people know is 300. Forget 300. The number that matters is 5,000. 5,000 Spartiates, full Spartan citizen warriors, marched north to Plataea. This had never happened before. In the entire recorded history of Sparta, the city-state had never committed this many of its core warriors to a single campaign outside its own borders. Not once. To understand what that means, you need to understand what it cost to be one of those 5,000. At age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and entered into the agoge, the state training system that ran their entire existence for the next 13 years. No home, no softness, no permission to fail. They slept in barracks. They were trained to endure cold without flinching, hunger without complaint, and pain without acknowledgement. Not because Sparta was cruel for its own sake, but because Sparta understood something brutal and clear. War does not care how you feel about it. The boys who couldn't survive the agoge were removed from the warrior class, permanently. The boys who completed it became something the ancient world had no precise language for. Human beings who had voluntarily dismantled the instinct for self-preservation and replaced it with formation discipline. Each of those 5,000 Spartiates marched with approximately 7 helots, agricultural laborers serving as light infantry and support, bringing the Spartan Laconian contingent alone to roughly 40,000 people. Add 8,000 Athenian hoplites, 5,000 Corinthians, contingents from Tegea, Megara, Phlius, Troezen, and dozens of smaller city-states. The Hellenic League at Plataea, by Herodotus's accounting, was somewhere between 80,000 and 110,000 men. And who commanded this force, this fractured, threat-held, grief-driven army into the most consequential battle in Greek history? A man named Pausanias. Not a king, a regent, ruling on behalf of Leonidas's young son, who was too small to hold a spear. His uncle had died at Thermopylae with the spear through him, and his head on a Persian stake. He marched his forces to the foothills of Mount Cithaeron and took the high ground above the Asopus River. Across that river, on the flat plains below, the Persian commander Mardonius was waiting. Mardonius was not a ceremonial commander. He was not filling a throne because of blood. He had served Darius I. He had survived a catastrophic storm off the coast of Athos that destroyed 300 ships under his watch, the kind of disaster that ends military careers, and rebuilt his reputation from the wreckage. He was related to the Persian royal family by marriage. He had reportedly pushed for this invasion of Greece. Some ancient sources suggest the entire Second Persian invasion was largely his strategic vision, but Mardonius had a problem that no amount of tactical genius could solve. His army was devastatingly effective on open flat ground. Persian cavalry, Bactrian, Thessalian, elite, was arguably the finest in the known world. His immortals, the royal infantry, were among the most disciplined soldiers alive, and the Greeks were sitting on a hill. Mardonius couldn't make them come down, so for 11 days nothing happened. 11 days. I want you to feel what that means, not strategically but physically. 80,000 men. Summer heat in Boeotia. Dust and sweat and flies and the smell of an army that large pressed into a fixed position for almost 2 weeks. This wasn't a dramatic standoff. This was endurance as warfare, attrition as strategy, and it was Mardonius's plan, because Mardonius knew something about the Greeks that the Greeks may not have known about themselves. How do you break an army of 80,000 without fighting them? You find the one thing they can't live without. The Greek position had one vulnerability, one spring. The Gargathian springs supplied water to the entire Hellenic League. Every man, every animal, every cookfire. One source. Mardonius's cavalry began systematic raids on Greek supply lines. Not charges, not battles. Raids, intercepting convoys coming through the mountain passes, burning grain stores, filling smaller water sources with debris and animal carcasses. This wasn't honor, this was engineering. He was slowly dismantling the logistics of 80,000 human beings, starving them and dehydrating them into a position where they had to move. The Persian cavalry commander leading many of these raids was a man named Mecistius. Herodotus calls him, specifically, deliberately, the most admired man in the Persian army. He was enormous. He wore a gold-scaled breastplate beneath his outer robes, the kind of layered armor that turns a battlefield into an assassination puzzle. In one engagement near the Greek forward lines, an arrow found his horse. The Athenians surrounded him immediately. They couldn't kill him. Arrows deflected off the breastplate. Spear thrusts glanced away. The man lay on the ground in full combat, and the Athenians could not get through him, until someone found the gap between his helmet visor and the gorget beneath it. The Greeks paraded his body on a cart along their entire line. Soldiers broke from position to look at him. Men who had been told by Persian propaganda that their cavalry was invincible. Here was the most invincible man in that cavalry, dead on a wooden cart, his gold armor dull in the afternoon sun. Mardonius's cavalry sheared their horses' manes in grief. The sound that came from the Persian camp that afternoon was not drums or preparation. It was lamentation. Small details accumulate. Morale is a physical thing. You can feel it shift. And then Mardonius made his decisive move. He sent cavalry to the Gargantuan spring. They destroyed it completely, collapsed the stone banks, threw in debris, turned a clear spring into unusable mud. 80,000 men. No water. No incoming food. Summer heat. Pausanias called a council. The decision was strategically correct and logistically terrifying. A night withdrawal. 3 columns, simultaneously, moving 80,000 men through darkness in coordinated silence to a secondary position closer to Plataea itself. Better water, better supply. The Spartans and Tegeans on the right, the Athenians on the left, the Allied center pulling back toward the town. In the modern world, you execute something like this with radio coordination, GPS, prearranged signals, synchronized watches. The ancient world had torches and horn calls, and the assumption that every commander at every level would execute his part of the plan at the right time. That is not what happened, because one Spartan commander, a man named Epaminondas, commanding his own unit of Spartiates, refused. He bent down, picked up a large stone with both hands, and dropped it at Pausanias' feet. Herodotus records that he said, and I want you to hear the absolute finality in this, that this stone was his vote on the question of retreating from the enemy. He wasn't going. What do? You are commanding the largest Greek army in history. Your plan requires perfect synchronization. And one of your most critical unit commanders has just placed a rock at your feet and told you, in the dark with the night half gone, that he will not move. You cannot leave him. Spartan culture did not permit abandoning Spartiates on a battlefield regardless of the circumstances. It wasn't sentiment, it was the social contract that made the entire Spartan military identity possible. If you left Mehmed behind, you didn't just lose one unit, you fractured the idea of what Sparta was. The argument lasted until nearly dawn. The rest of the army had already begun moving. The Allied center largely completed their withdrawal. The Athenians, receiving conflicting signals in the dark, had stopped and were waiting for clarification that wasn't arriving. What had been designed as a coordinated retreat was now 3 separate forces in 3 different states of motion, scattered across the foothills in the grey hour before sunrise. And across the Asopus River, Mardonius had cavalry scouts who had been watching every torch, every movement, every confusion. Dawn broke. Mardonius looked across the river. The Greek heights were partially empty. Scattered formations visible in the low morning light, some moving, some stationary, some apparently directionless. The camp half abandoned. From where he stood, it looked like an army breaking apart, men retreating in disorder. A coalition that had finally fractured under the pressure he had been building for 11 days. It looked like victory arriving without a battle. He ordered the crossing of the Asopus. It was the last major decision of his life. The Persian cavalry hit the Spartan rearguard first. Epaminondas' unit, still moving slowly, still making his point about retreating, still separated from the main Spartan column. The Spartan column stopped. Pausanias sent a runner to the Athenians. "We need you on our right." The Athenians began moving toward the Spartans and ran directly into the Theban hoplites, Greeks fighting for Persia, moving to cut them off. The Athenians had their own battle now. The Spartans were alone. Pausanias ordered his men to hold position. The Persian arrows were coming in, and he waited. He was waiting for omens, specifically for the ritual sacrifice of a goat to produce favorable signs. The Tegeans positioned beside the Spartans, taking casualties, couldn't hold the posture any longer. They advanced without orders. The omens became favorable. Pausanias ordered the advance. Try to understand what a Spartan phalanx was, not as a historical fact, but as a physical experience on the receiving end. 5,000 men, each carrying an aspis, a heavy circular bronze shield, interlocked with the shield of the man on his left, creating a continuous wall of bronze and muscle, each carrying a 7-foot spear. 8 ranks deep, meaning even as front men fell, the push from behind never stopped. The formation doesn't need the front rank to be alive to keep moving forward. The weight behind it is the weapon. And they walked. Not ran, walked, under control, adjusting to the terrain, keeping the line. The Persian infantry, including units of the Immortals, the Royal Guard, elite soldiers who had served as the cutting edge of Persian military power for decades, fought back with a ferocity that Herodotus records almost with awe. They grabbed at the spears with their bare hands and broke them. They didn't run. They died in place. But the formation didn't feel it. The shields overlapped. The men behind pushed forward regardless. The phalanx isn't a collection of individuals making individual decisions. It's a single organism with one instruction: forward. And somewhere in the middle of this, mounted on a white horse, surrounded by his 1,000-man royal bodyguard, visible to every soldier on both sides, was Mardonius. This was Persian military culture at its core, the commander in the battle, not above it. Visible, present, the living proof that the cause was worth dying for. As long as Mardonius was visible, the line held. There was a Spartan soldier on that field. His name was Iamestus. Ancient sources record his name specifically, which itself tells you the magnitude of what he did. Because in ancient military histories, individual soldiers at the level of a single hoplite are almost never named. You are named if you change something. He wasn't close enough for a spear. He had no javelin. He looked down at the ground. He threw it. It struck Mardonius, knocked him from his horse. In the press of fighting surrounding him, his 1,000-man bodyguard, trying to fight and protect simultaneously, could not extract him. Mardonius was dead. The Persian line, which had been holding against something that should have broken it, which had been fighting with bare hands against bronze, didn't hold anymore. Men who had been gripping Spartan spear shafts 30 seconds ago turned and ran. Not a tactical withdrawal, a collapse. One stone, thrown by one man whose name history almost lost. That was the moment. The Persian army had a fortified camp on the Yasipus plain, a large wooden stockade that had been their base and their supply depot for the entire campaign. When the line broke, survivors ran for it, tens of thousands of men inside. Gates sealed, no commander, no orders, no Mardonius. The Tygians breached a section first. The Athenians came behind them, tearing down sections of wooden fortification with the kind of systematic efficiency that only comes from men who have already watched their own city burn. Then the Spartans arrived. Herodotus, who is not a man who avoids difficult descriptions, goes briefly quiet about what happened inside that stockade. He gives casualty estimates, vague ones, extraordinary ones. He moves on. The numbers he cites suggest that of an army Herodotus calls 300,000, almost certainly inflated, something approaching 3,000 survived. Think about that ratio. This was not a battle. Inside the stockade there were no formations, no commanders, no exits. Men who had crossed from Asia to conquer a continent, who had burned a city's temples to ash, who had marched across the Hellespont on a bridge of ships, were trapped in a burning wooden enclosure with no way out and no one to die for. The Greeks entered from multiple breach points. It was over before the morning was gone. The looting of a Persian royal camp was unlike anything Greek soldiers had seen or would see again. Mardonius had been traveling with the apparatus of Persian royal luxury, not excess for its own sake, but the deliberate physical expression of imperial power. Gold and silver tent fittings, furniture of carved cedar, storage vessels of a quality that had no equivalent in the Greek world, personal treasuries, tableware from Persepolis. Plutarch records that Pausanias, possibly the most composed man on that battlefield, ordered Mardonius's cooks to prepare a full Persian royal meal. Then he had a Spartan meal prepared side by side, and he showed both to his officers. He looked at the Persian meal, and he said, according to Plutarch, that this was why Persia had crossed half the world to take something it clearly didn't understand. A people with food like this had come to take a land of men who ate like that. Whether Pausanias actually said it doesn't change what it reveals. The fact that this story existed, that this was the image Greeks chose to attach to their victory, tells you how they processed what they'd found. They didn't see luxury, they saw the evidence of a people who had mistaken abundance for strength. Ancient sources, Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus, make a claim that historians have been arguing about ever since. On the same day that Plataea ended, the Greek fleet destroyed the same day. Is this true? Coordinating a land battle in Boeotia with a naval battle in Anatolia on the same calendar day, with no modern communications, this strains the edges of probability. But here's what matters more than whether it's literally accurate. The Greeks needed it to be the same day. They needed the ending to be total, not sequential, not one victory and then another. Simultaneous. A single moment when the entire war, every loss, every burned temple, every head on a stake, resolved at once. That's not historical recording, that's psychological need becoming mythology, and the mythology is also data. The war didn't end at Plataea on a legal certificate. Skirmishes continued in the Aegean. The Hellenic League would campaign for years. Persia didn't formally acknowledge Greek independence until the Peace of Callias, decades later. But Persia never sent another army to the Greek mainland, not in the reign of Xerxes, not under any subsequent Achaemenid king, not ever. That line, the border where Persian expansion stopped permanently, was drawn in the mud outside Plataea on a morning in August 479 BC, by a stone thrown by one soldier, by 300 men who had refused to move at a mountain pass 11 months earlier, by 80,000 people held together by grief and mutual threat, who fought in the heat for a river crossing while dehydrated and leaderless, and managed, by the narrowest possible margins, to not break before the other side did. If you've watched this far, you already know this channel is different. The historian fact doesn't give you the cleaned up version. We give you the version with mud on it, the actual decisions, the actual fear, the actual moment before everything changed. If that's the history you've been looking for, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because the next video goes even deeper into a story that most historians have deliberately avoided. And like this video, it genuinely helps more people find it who would never find it otherwise. We'll see you in the next one. Here's the thing about Thermopylae and Plataea. Thermopylae gets the film, the statues, the cultural afterlife that spans 2,500 years. Plataea gets a paragraph, sometimes less. And for a long time I assumed that was an accident of history, that some battles are just remembered and some aren't. But I don't think it's an accident. Cultures remember what they need. Thermopylae gives you the beautiful loss, the defiant stand, the sacrifice that costs everything and changes nothing in the immediate military sense, but everything in the human sense. Plataea gives you something harder. Plataea gives you what happens after the beautiful sacrifice, the accounting, the debt collected, the morning after a night no one wants to describe in detail. The 300 at Thermopylae held a pass for 3 days. The Greeks at Plataea held something that didn't have a name in 479 BC, but which we have been living inside ever since. Pause. History doesn't always remember what was most important. It remembers what was most useful to remember. The question worth asking, the one that lasts longer than the video, is whose usefulness you've been carrying and whether it's still serving you.